Hi, I'm Robin from the Tolkien Fellowship in Brisbane, and I'm just going to read something from the Fellowship of the Ring, which is about Frodo's flight to the Ford. And I'm reading it because in the movie I felt that Frodo really wasn't shown as he should have been shown. I mean, I love the movies, they were fantastic, but I just thought Frodo was very plucky, and I feel that this passage shows a little bit of that courage that he had. So it starts with Glorfindel from Rivendell, and he has come to help Strider and the hobbits to get to Rivendell, and he has his elf horse with him, and he puts Frodo onto the horse because the horse will look after him. One moment Glorfindel turned and listened, then he sprang forward with a loud cry. "Fly!" he called, "fly! The enemy is upon us!" The white horse leaped forward. The hobbits ran down the slope. Glorfindel and Strider followed his rear guard. They were only halfway across the flat when suddenly there was a noise of horses galloping. Out of the gate in the trees that they had just left rode a black rider. He reined his horse in and halted, swaying in his saddle. Another followed him, then another, then again two more. "Ride forward, ride!" cried Glorfindel to Frodo. He did not obey at once, for a strange reluctance seized him. Checking the horse to a walk, he turned and looked back. The riders seemed to sit upon their great steeds like threatening statues upon a hill, dark and solid, while all the woods and land about them receded as if into a mist. Suddenly he knew in his heart that they were silently commanding him to wait. Then at once fear and hatred awoke in him. His hand left the bridle and gripped the hilt of his sword, and with a red flash he drew it. Ride on, cried Glorfindel, and then loud and clear he called to the horse in the elf tongue, Norolem, Norolem Asfaloth. At once the white horse sprang away and sped like the wind along the last lap of the road. At the same moment the black horses leaped down the hill in pursuit, and from the riders came a terrible cry, such as Frodo had heard filling the woods with horror and the East Farthing far away. It was answered, and to the dismay of Frodo and his friends, out from the trees and rocks away on the left, 4 other riders came flying. 2 rode towards Frodo, 2 galloped madly towards the ford to cut off his escape. They seemed to him to run like the wind and to grow swiftly larger and darker as their courses converged with his. Frodo looked back for a moment over his shoulder. He could no longer see his friends. The riders behind were falling back. Even their great steeds were no match in speed for the white elf horse of Glorfindel. He looked forward again, and hope faded. There seemed no chance of reaching the ford before he was cut off by the others that had lain in ambush. He could see them clearly now. They appeared to have cast aside their hoods and black coats, and they were robed in white and grey. Swords were naked in their pale hands, helms were on their heads. Their cold eyes glittered, and they called to him with fell voices. Fear now filled all Frodo's mind. He thought no longer of his sword. No cry came from him. He shut his eyes and clung to the horse's mane. The wind whistled in his ears, and the bells upon the harness rang wild and shrill. A breath of deadly cold pierced him like a spear, as with a last spurt, like a flash of white fire, the elf horse, speeding as if on wings, passed right before the face of the foremost rider. Frodo heard the splash of water. It foamed about his feet. He felt the quick heave and surge as the horse left the river and struggled up the stony path. He was climbing the steep bank. He was across the ford. But the pursuers were close behind. At the top of the bank, the horse halted and turned about, neighing fiercely. There were 9 riders at the water's edge below, and Frodo's spirit quailed before the threat of their uplifted faces. He knew of nothing that would prevent them from crossing as easily as he had done, and he felt that it was useless to try to escape over the long, uncertain path from the ford to the edge of Rivendell if once the riders crossed. In any case, he felt that he was commanded urgently to halt. Hatred again stirred in him, but he had no longer the strength to refuse. Suddenly, the foremost rider spurred his horse forward. It checked at the water and reared up. With a great effort, Frodo sat upright and brandished his sword. "Go back!" he cried. "Go back to the land of Mordor, and follow me no more." His voice sounded thin and shrill in his own ears. The The riders halted, but Frodo had not the power of Bombadil. His enemies laughed at him with a harsh and chilling laughter. Come back, they called. To Mordor we will take you. Go back, he whispered. The ring, they cried with deadly voices, and immediately their leader urged his horse forward into the water, followed closely by 2 others. By Elbereth and Luthien the Fair, said Frodo with a last effort, lifting up his sword, you shall have neither the ring nor me. Then the leader, who was now half across the ford, stood up menacing in his stirrups and raised up his hand. Frodo was stricken dumb. He felt his tongue cleave to his mouth and his heart labouring. His sword broke and fell out of his shaking hand. The elf horse reared and snorted. The foremost of the black horses had almost set foot upon the shore. At that moment there came a roaring and a rushing, a noise of loud waters rolling many stones. Dimly Frodo saw the water below him rise, and down along its course there came a plumed cavalry of waves. White flames seemed to Frodo to flicker on their crests, and he half fancied that he saw amid the water white riders upon white horses with frothing manes. The 3 riders that were still in the midst of the ford were overwhelmed. They disappeared, buried suddenly under angry foam. Those that were behind drew back in dismay. With his last failing senses, Frodo heard cries, and it seemed to him that he saw, beyond the riders that hesitated on the shore, a shining figure of white light, and behind it ran small shadowy forms waving flames that flared red in the grey mist that was falling over the world. The black horses were filled with madness, and leaping forward in terror, they bore their riders into the rushing flood. Their piercing cries were drowned in the roaring of the river as it carried them away. Then Frodo felt himself falling, and the roaring and confusion seemed to rise and engulf him together with his enemies. He heard and saw no more. Thank you.
G'day, my name's Phillip Jackson. I'll be reading from the Silmarillion, chapter 20 of the 5th battle, which refers to the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. So I'll only be reading a small section from that. Last of all, the eastern force to stand firm were the dwarfs of Belegost, and thus they won renown. For the Northmen withstood fire more hardily than either elves or men, and it was their custom, moreover, to wear great masks in battle hideous to look upon, and those stood them in good stead against the dragons. And, but for them, Glorong and his brood would have withered all that was left of the Noldor. But the Nolgrim made a circle about him when he assailed them, and even his mighty armour was not foolproof against the blows of their great axes. And when in his rage Glorong turned and struck down Azagol, lord of Belegost, and crawled over him, with his last stroke Azagol drove a knife into his belly, and so wounded him that he fled the field, and the beasts of Argband in dismay followed after him. Then the dwarfs raised up the body of Azagol and bore it away. With slow steps they walked behind, singing a dirge in deep voices, as it were a funeral pomp in their country, and gave no heed to their foes, and none dared to stay them. But now in the western battle, Fingon and Turgon were assailed by a tide of foes thrice greater than all the force that was left to them. Gothbog, lord of Belrogs, high captain of Argband, was come, and he drove a dark wedge between the elven hosts, surrounding King Fingon and thrusting Turgon and Huron aside towards the fen of Serech. Then he turned upon Fingon. That was a grim meeting. At last Fingon stood alone with his guard dead about him, and he fought with Gothbog, until another Belrog came behind and cast a thong of fire about him. Then Gothbog hewed him with his black axe, and a white flame sprang up from the helm of Fingon as it was cloven. Thus fell the High King Lenolda, and they beat him to the dust with their maces, and his banner, blue and silver, they trod into the mire of his blood. The field was lost, but still Huron and Hor and the remnant of the house of Hardar stood firm with Turgon of Gondolin, and the host of Morgoth could not yet win the pass of Sirion. Then Huron spoke to Turgon, saying, Go now, Lord, while time is, for anew lives the last hope of the elder, and while Gondolin stands, Morgoth shall yet no fear in his heart. But Turgon answered, Not long now can Gondolin be hidden, and being discovered it must fall. Then Huron spoke and said, Yet if it stands but a little while, then out of your house shall come the hope of elves and men. This I say to you, Lord, with the eyes of death. Though we part here forever, and I shall not look on your white walls again, from you and from me a new star shall arise. Farewell. Then Turgon took the counsel of Huron and Hor, and summoning all that remained of the host of Gondolin, and of such of Fingon's people as could be gathered, he retreated towards the pass of Sirion, and his captains Ectelion and Glorfindel guarded the flanks to right and left, so that none of the enemy should pass them by. But the men of Dol Loman held the rear guard, as Huron and Huor desired, for they did not wish in their hearts to leave the Northlands, and if they could not win back to their homes, there they would stand to the end. Thus was the treachery of Alder redressed, and of all the deeds of war that the fathers of men wrought on behalf of the other, the last stand of the men of Dol Loman is most renowned. So it was that Turgon fought his way southward, until coming behind the guard of Huron and Huor, he passed down Serain and escaped. Then he vanished into the mountains and was hidden from the eyes of Morgoth. But the brothers drew the remnant of the men of the house of Harda about them, and foot by foot they withdrew, until they came behind the fen of Serach, and held the stream of Rivendell before them. There they stood and gave way no more. Then all the hosts of Argban swarmed against them, and they bridged the stream with their dead, and encircled the ruin of Hiflim as a gathering tide about a rock. There, as the sun wested on the 6th day, and the shadow of Erebor grew dark, Huor fell, pierced with a venom arrow in his eye, and all the valiant men of Harda were slain about him in a heap. And the orcs hewed their heads and piled them as a mound of gold in the sunset. Last of all, Huron stood alone. Then he cast aside his shield and wielded an axe two-handed, and it is sung that the axe smoked in the black blood of the troll guard of Gothmog until it withered. And each time he slew, Huron cried, Yor en Talaval, day shall come again. 70 times he uttered that cry, but they took him at last alive by the command of Morgoth. For the orcs grappled him with their hands, which clung to him still though he hewed off their arms, and ever their numbers were renewed, till at last he fell buried beneath them. Then Gothmog bound him and dragged him to Argban with mockery. Thus ended Edith Nadabed, as the sun went down beyond the sea. Night fell in Hiflim, and there came a great storm of wind out of the west. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Christine. I am a Tolkien fan, and I have been playing the harp for 3 years, and I am currently learning Lord of the Rings songs, and I wish to play Into the West, which has been modified for a 22-inch harp. Hold on. That's all. Thank you.
G'day you beautiful people, my name's Lynne Gryphon and I'm a member of the Brisbane Tolkien Society. I'm going to read to you a little poem by Bilbo. Upon the heath the fire is red, beneath the roof there is a bed. But not yet weary are our feet, still around the corner we may meet. A sudden tree or a standing stone, that none have seen but we alone. Tree and flower, leaf and grass, let them pass, let them pass. Hill and water under sky, pass them by, pass them by. Still around the corner they may wait, a road or a secret gate. And through we pass them by today, tomorrow we may come by this way. And take the hidden paths that run towards the moon to the sun. Apple, thorn, and nut and shoe, let them go, let them go. Sand and stone, and pool and dell, fare you well, fare you well. Home is behind, the world ahead, and there are many paths to tread. Through shadow to the edge of night, until the stars are alight. Then world behind and home ahead. will wander back to home and bed. Mist and twilight, cloud and shade, away shade, away shade. Fire and lamp, meat and bread, and then to bed, and then to bed. And that's the end. And the last paragraph was actually in the movie by Pippin. So I hope you enjoyed that, and thank you.